Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Want to show a little merch here. Welcome back, everyone, to the Black and Corporate Executive Coffee Chats. We have a very special guest today with us. We welcome Chris Rose, current Vice President of Scheduling and Acquisitions at A+E Networks. Chris has over 20 years of experience in the world of media and entertainment, and I'm sure he has seen it all. Some of his former companies include NBC, BET, Discovery Communications, Turner Sports, and he currently resides in New York City. I'm sure his list of mentees is super vast from near and far, and he moderates many panels and participates in many panels as well. And that's actually how I stumbled upon Chris from his participation at the National Association for Multi-Ethnicity in Communications. There was an event where Chris was there and again offered his expertise to young professionals coming behind him to learn from. So that's a great way to give back that he does all the time. And yeah, hopefully we'll find out a lot more about Chris today on our episode. So let's welcome Chris. Cue a little applause.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yes, thank you for joining. In true Black and corporate fashion, we have to welcome you in with an icebreaker.
Okay.
And so it'd be a quick speed round, be 10 questions. Up for the challenge?
Up for the challenge. Let's do it.
Okay, let's go. So,
was that the first question?
No. Right. First things that come to your mind.
Okay.
Here we go. Elevator pitch or coffee chat?
Coffee chat.
Okay. East Coast or West Coast?
East Coast.
Okay. Favorite quote or life motto?
You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Okay. So that's your life motto?
That's a life motto. It's something that my mom always taught me. You can encourage somebody to do something, but they've got to be able to do it themselves. And you can't make someone do something. You can offer advice, but they've got to take the initiative to do it.
Gotcha. Okay. Smoothie or healthy juice?
Smoothie.
Okay. Post-it note or highlighter pen?
Ooh. Highlighter pen.
Okay. Blazer or no blazer?
Depends on the situation, but right now, blazer.
Okay. Best regards or best?
Best.
Okay, same. Presentation or brief?
Ooh, brief.
Okay. Audio or visual, or also music or film?
I would say both, depending on the situation, but visual.
Okay. Good idea or good follow through?
Good follow through. Because a good idea could be one thing, but the follow through and the follow up and making it, come to fruition is another thing.
Precisely. Okay, that concludes our 10 questions.
All right.
Yes, that was fun. Thanks for doing that. Yes. We'll move right along. I do, obviously you've accomplished so much. You're in this position, right? Sitting in media and entertainment, super coveted field. And you've been doing this for a long time. You didn't just start. So let's go to the beginning and how you even knew that you wanted to do something in this industry. How did it come about? Where did the dream sprout? And start kind of at the beginnings, how you grew up. Did anything influence you as a child to make you want to be in TV or media? What were kind of your beginnings?
Yeah, so I grew up in Long Island, which is right outside of New York City for people who aren't familiar with it. And, ever since I can remember, I've always had a love of television. So I can remember coming home, after school and after you do your homework, just sitting in front of the TV and watching reruns of, some of my favorite shows. And I don't want to date myself, but, I don't know, Different Strokes or Good Times or, even Leave It to Beaver, stuff like that. It could be anything. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So it really ran the gamut. I was always fascinated by television. I when I was little, I wanted to be on air. I wanted to be a sportscaster. So when I was, probably 14 or 15, I wrote a letter to Marv Albert, who's the famous sportscaster, which, some of you are probably familiar with, has had a long career in the industry, sports, basketball, football, what have you. And I wrote him a letter, just expressing my interest in if he can offer any advice, and not expecting, this really high profile sportscaster to write back. But, lo and behold, about a month later, I got a letter back in the mail, him thanking me for the letter and offering, different words of advice and encouragement. But the other thing he also mentioned was, take a look at Syracuse University, because Syracuse University has one of the top communication schools, Newhouse, in the country. He was a graduate of and an alum of Syracuse, so that's kind of was my foray into knowing about what Syracuse was and the great communication school that they had, and the journalism school and all the stuff that was available at that university, and that encouraged me to apply there. I got accepted there, and I was part of the Newhouse School at Syracuse.
Yeah. Wow. That's first of all, you got a response.
Yeah. So at Syracuse, I intended to study journalism and sports, and I did study journalism a little bit, but I obviously didn't end up being on air. I kind of think I ended up being one of those people who, didn't want to be one of those people who started in a small market and had to work their way up. Which in retrospect, if I had wanted to pursue that passion 100%, that's what you have to do, So, so midway through my Syracuse journey, I kind of dovetailed and I pivoted to studying television, radio, and film, because one of my other passions as part of television was kind of like the business side of television. Like, how does a show get greenlit? Who decides how the show is greenlit? Who decides how it gets scheduled and marketed? And that was kind of interesting to me. So I studied television, radio, and film, and then coming out of school, it's hard to get into that job field. That specific job field is scheduling and strategy. There are not a lot of jobs available to people in scheduling and strategy. But the next best thing is kind of to work in research. So I worked in research for my first job out of school was at a company called Katz Media, and I was actually hired by a gentleman who had been an alum of Syracuse. So I had attended a job fair about 2 months prior to graduation, and he was looking for people to work in his team. So I got hired. I started 2 weeks out of school, and that kind of got me into the TV industry, and that's how things began. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to ramble on, but because you probably have questions about stuff I mentioned.
Yeah. So I don't want to put all your dates out there, but yeah, I did say over 20 years of experience.
I started when I was 10. Yes.
Yes. But just to kind of throw it out there, you kind of saw some of for at least me in my book, I look at the 90s and, even you could argue maybe like the early 2000s too, definitely in TV and stuff, as probably like the nub of quality content, at least for me, that I saw growing up, because, those were all the movies that were mainstays in our home on VHS tapes,
Wow, VHS, wow.
Yes, I got a VHS player for my 7th birthday, and I was the happiest girl. So yes, I lived through that time as well. 95 baby. But wow. Yeah, you came into, ad sales, correct? Starting in
ad sales research. Yep.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So you came onto the scene during that moment in time, I guess you could say. How would you, because I want to venture to say, you said Long Island. That's where you grew up. So were you trying to also on the side do anything with just I guess your location, maybe like going to any events in New York City? Like how did that play a part in your beginnings into the industry?
Well, I've always been big about networking.
Mm-hmm.
So I would always, post college, go to different networking events in the cities, and you're just hanging out with your friends or what have you. It's just a great way to not only meet people, but network with like-minded people in the industry and kind of find out what's going on and find out about jobs and what's going on in the industry. So, for anyone out there watching, I will definitely encourage you to network, because that's kind of how a lot of people think that just by submitting a resume, on a job website, that's how your resume is going to get seen. But it's oftentimes more helpful to have that resume passed on by someone who's within the organization or who can vouch for you. Because the HR person is gonna probably go with the opinion of someone who they trust and can rely on. So that's not to say that your resume wouldn't get picked out on a website, but it's good to have someone who can vouch for you and push your resume along, nudge it along a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So at that time, and also shout out to Syracuse University.
Syracuse.
Yes, definitely has produced so many great people. Shout out to Shanti Das,
Oh
early
yeah.
mentor of mine. So
Oh yeah.
yes, you all have some great quality folks.
Quality folks. That's right.
Yes. But also to just continue on that path in your first role, what were some of the responsibilities that you were given, and what were your expectations for what that role would give to you as far as experience and maybe like leverage to what you really wanted to do?
Yeah. So my goal, honestly, my goal was to have a job.
Okay.
Because like I mentioned, was 2 weeks out of school, and I was back home living at home. So it wasn't really any grandiose vision or anything like that. It was to kind of just start working, but all with the goal eventually is to transition into program scheduling and strategy. Um, so yeah, I would say that was my initial goal. But in terms of like the day-to-day job, so Katz Media is a rep firm. So what a rep firm does is represent. Rep means represent smaller stations throughout the country who don't have their own ad sales team or don't have a big ad sales research team. So in New York, the ad sales research team would be assigned various different stations throughout the country, and you kind of rep those stations. You're providing them sales research support. You're providing ratings information, helping them make estimates so they can go back to their advertiser clients and say, oh yeah, we expect this show or this sporting events to do so and so rating, and this is how much it's going to cost for you to advertise in this particular program. Because in these smaller markets, they didn't really have the wherewithal to be able to produce that kind of information. So that's what we did from our New York office. But I only worked in that job for, I would say, probably 9 or 10 months, because then I got hired to work at NBC. Katz is a stepping stone for a lot of people. They don't pay very much. At least they didn't when I worked there. So people tend to work there, get the experience, and kind of move on to another job where you kind of make a lot more money. Not a lot more money, but a little bit more money.
Mm-hmm. Now, how was that first transition to NBC? You know,
To NBC. NBC was good. I think everybody always loves working at 30 Rock. That's where I worked. And people love having the prestige of having NBC on their resume or what have you. Learned a lot. The job was fairly similar to the Katz job. I worked with the owned and operated stations group, so also representing various NBC owned and operated stations. Unfortunately, as part of that job, they had massive layoffs. This is right before 9/11, so it was probably in February or March of 2001. So I was laid off from that job after about a year. Fortunately, this goes back to the part about networking. I had, before I had left NBC, I had been interviewing, and I had been interviewing at Turner Sports. And once, my future boss at Turner Sports had heard that I had gotten laid off, he reached out to me. So I kind of went from, being laid off at NBC for a couple of weeks to transitioning right into that new job at Turner Sports. So it worked out in the end.
Yeah, that was nice.
Yeah.
And how was I guess when you were working at NBC, was it like, you're sitting at a desk, you had to show up shirt and tie, every day?
Yeah, that's a good question. Every culture is different. At Katz and at Turner and at NBC with shirt and tie, you had to be there at, I think it was probably 9 a.m. Um, but I've worked at other companies where it's a little bit more relaxed. You can wear, a button-down shirt or maybe some jeans. I've never been the type of person who wears sneakers in the office. There are other people who tend to do that sort of stuff, but I don't like to do that. Um, but yeah, every office space is different, so you have to adapt to the culture of whatever environment that you're working in.
Yeah. And when you say you haven't been the type to be, more relaxed in your dress at work, do you feel that it's because, you are a Black man occupying space in a corporate, workplace, and that you feel that you need to
Yes.
on?
Yeah, I think that you know, um, you know, this is a society that tends to judge us a lot. So and it's not to say that you necessarily going to be treated any differently if you're dressed down versus dressed up, but um, why give people another reason to want to prejudge you, right? So
Yeah.
dress your best if you can, and if the culture calls for it. Some cultures, workplace cultures, if you're overdressed, then that's seen as like not a good thing also. So adapt to the culture that you're working in.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Um, okay, so we're moving through. When you're making these transitions, are you feeling like, oh my gosh, this is big? I'm making these big career transitions? Because I know for myself and like peers, my peers, that a lot of us are making our first moves.
Yeah.
This is my, I guess, about third, fourth-ish year for folks my age in our roles that we got out of college. So a lot of people are now fishing for something more specific and
Hmm.
detailed to their interests. So it's like a big thing for us. But was it a big thing for you, or were you just going, hey, I mean, well, obviously that was circumstantial with the layoffs, but after that and you're transitioning, where you like, okay, I need to be really intentional from this Cats. I learned that I like this, or, at NBC, I learned that I like this.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of whatever your environment or company that you're working in, making sure that you're continuing to grow and you don't feel like your career is getting stagnant. Because you could stay at a company for 10, 15, 20 years and continue to grow and feel like you're learning stuff and ascending within the company. But I think if you're within the company and you feel like you've been there for a couple of years and you're not getting to where you need to be, um, then it's time to first have that conversation with your boss and your manager, just to see what the plan is for your growth within the company. And if it feels like there's not a path where you're going to continue to grow or ascend within the company, then I think it's never hurts to explore other options. My other favorite quote is, I'm not always looking, but I'm always listening. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're, always actively looking for a new job. But, if someone approaches you and says, hey, would you consider this? Then, never hurts to listen, because, sometimes those opportunities are presented to you at a time that you least expect it.
Right. Wow. Okay. So fast
Yeah.
forward to Turner Sports.
Yeah.
that experience. And this is kind of connecting to your original dream, which is, to be a sportscaster, I think you were saying.
Sportscaster, yeah. So this is still an ad sales position, but Turner Sports, and they're still heavily into sports, obviously, with the NBA and on TNT. But at that time, they had not only the NBA on TNT, but they had just got NASCAR. They were still airing Braves baseball, and I think they had the PGA Championship at the time. So heavily into sports. Um, but yeah, still, and I should also note that with each position, I was kind of ascending in title. So that's the other reason why, I made the move, more better title and more money, and continuing to grow, of course. But I was there for 2.5 years, and I kind of referenced that I was there on 9/11, which was a crazy day. It's crazy that we're coming up on 20 years on that anniversary. And it's a day I will never forget, and I remember exactly where I was and what I was doing, and so it's kind of it's funny that you mentioned that, because it's that 20 years is coming up very rapidly. So, but great experience working there. Um, like I mentioned, I did that for I think a little under 3 years, and then I transitioned to I was a senior analyst there, and I transitioned to a manager's position at Fox. So at Fox, this is where it comes to going back to layoffs. Got laid off at Fox. Now, the difference between this layoff and the first layoff, and the thing I should first note is that, layoffs are not always the worst thing in the world. I was fortunate in both cases to get severance, so I was able to, have money to support myself while I was looking for a new position. But I used this time to, I tell myself I wasn't gonna work in ad sales research anymore. I had been doing all these jobs, but they weren't passion projects for me. I wanted to, make that transition to scheduling and strategy. And so what I did for about 2 or 3 months when I was laid off was I had a Namic directory, and you mentioned Namic earlier. But at the time, they actually had a physical book. So I went through every name in the book of people who were actually in, scheduling and programming and strategy, and I just, cold called them, or I emailed them and reached out to just pick their brain about what they did, get pointers or advice about how to transition into the industry, and then within that, I was able to connect with someone at BET who was looking for BET at that time. Their scheduling and programming department was actually physically based in DC, but I was able to come in and do. It was kind of like initially it was like a hybrid research slash programming job, and I was able to do it in New York. So I started at BET in New York at the beginning of 2007. 2007. Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I'm thinking the physical book. Now
Physical book. Now everything's online, but yeah, it was a physical book. But yeah, it was great, and it goes back to the power of networking. And what I would encourage anybody watching is to, never be afraid to reach out to someone and, say, hey, can I have 15 minutes or 30 minutes of your time? And now it's so easy with, now that we're a lot of us are at home and you can do it virtually, you don't even physically have to meet the person. But yeah, 15 to 30 minutes. I wouldn't say an hour, because an hour feels like, a lot to a lot of people. But if you say it's 15 to 30, then I think people tend to be pretty receptive about that.
So you go way back with Namic.
I do.
Which is pretty cool. That's full circle too for me. I'm like, wow, that's kind of how you finally got on that programming path.
Yeah, and the thing about Namic, which is so great also, is that they have they not only have the leadership seminar, which I was fortunate enough to do, but I was also able to do the executive leadership development program, which is like a year-long program where you take business and leadership classes at the University of Virginia, the Darden Business School. So about 2 or 3 times a year, you go down to Darden for a week and you study, you do other case studies with other people within the media industry. And it's great. It's great. Learned a lot there.
Nice.
And
Nice.
one of the professors is actually now the dean of UPenn's Wharton Business School. So yeah, yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Erica, yeah, Erica James. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that story, how the dots are connecting. Were there any other societies or organizations that you were able to lean on to, as your network, as you're building kind of your Rolodex in the industry coming up? Like, what were the things that or people or organizations that were pouring into you?
Yeah, I would say NAMIC has always been the big one. I've kind of come in and out of IRTS. Really, when I was in college, I was a member of IRTS, and I actually got selected to be. They had like a summer program out of college, but I had to turn it down because I wasn't making any money. So that's how I did the CATS job. Also, right now I'm a member of the TV Academy, which is the Emmy organization. So you get to vote for the Emmys every year. Those are the two big ones right now. But yeah, I would say just in general, mentorship and being a mentor to different people and talking to different people is kind of like what I like and love to do.
Yeah. And IRTS, for those listening, is International Radio and Television Society, if I'm not mistaken.
That's
Um,
correct. Yep.
yep. I ended up doing one of their workshops in college. And so, yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
IRTS
it's really
is
good.
a great organization as well.
Hmm.
So now you're into BT. You're doing what you've been wanting to do for the, past few years. How does it feel? And also let's kind of go back to take inventory of what have you learned so far through this process, if you can remember that stage in your corporate journey in your career where you're like, okay, now I've done several different roles, this is how I feel about myself, who I am as a professional, and what I want to do. Like, how are you positioning yourself going into that BT role?
How was I positioning myself? Um, you know, BET was looking for someone who could understand the numbers and not only had a good understanding of television and the audience and the competitive audience, but also could understand ratings and translating that to the rest of the team. So that's kind of how I positioned myself for the job. But also I wanted to transition for myself. I wanted to transition out of research and just mainly focus on the scheduling and strategy. So that took a couple years within being at BET. When I first started, the ratings at the network were not very good. This was also the time when Deborah Lee, who was the former president of BET, had been getting picketed on her lawn because of some shows that we had on the network that a lot of viewers felt was demeaning to the Black viewers and to our audience in general. So BET was under a lot of pressure at the time. I think one of the big things that happened that helped turn around the network was about 2 years into it, we actually had a department change within our company. And there was a little bit of a reorg. And we actually built up more of the New York-based team. And I kind of got a new boss. Actually, I did get a new boss. Had a really big acquisitions background, and one of the two shows that we acquired when she first started were Everybody Hates Chris and The Game. And if anybody who's watching does or doesn't know what The Game was a show on the CW network, and beloved show. I think people were hooked on it. Unfortunately, when it aired on the CW, the ratings were not very good. So we actually ended up acquiring all the first 3 seasons for the network, and we just ran it all over the schedule. And we were actually getting better ratings on BT than in reruns or in encores than it was actually getting on the CW in many instances. But when we saw those numbers, we're like, there's still a healthy appetite for this show. So we actually ended up greenlighting. If you remember, Taylor, we ended up greenlighting new episodes of the game specific to BET. That really helped turn the network around back in 2011.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do remember that. I was a fan of the game, that show. I love Girlfriends and the game. And of course, in retrospect, it's so funny, you know, they showed with Girlfriends reruns on Netflix. And in rewatching it, I was just like, wow, asking my mom, why were you letting me watch this at 7 years old? But I mean, I was excited for the new episodes with her and her sisters. And it's just like,
yeah. I think Netflix has every Black show from the 90s and the early 2000s. Yeah.
Yeah. On there.
Yeah.
But I was going to ask one more thing. Oh, so now you're into content. I wanted to kind of know, and I guess this is a question too for your later roles as well. What's the separation between content and, you know, your passion for the industry, the literal like thing, what everyone is working on versus working, you know, because you're in a company, but you're in an industry that's very like pop culture based and more relaxed and more informal as far as like TV entertainment, you know. So what's kind of that line drawn in the workplace between like, okay, we have to get this done, let's do these stand-ups or meetings versus, okay, we're content, we're thinking about what we love to do, let's just talk about the industry, let's be more, I guess, content based. I don't know if this is a very clear question, but just trying to figure out the separation between like what you're actually doing and then the doing of it.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing people don't realize is that, you know, television is a multi-billion-dollar business. So people who work in television, I think I don't know if people tend to have the sense that, you know, it's just television. And yes, it's just television because it's not, you know, life or death. We're not, you know, patching up gunshots or anything like that in the hospital. But, you know, advertisers look to television networks that's the best way for them to, you know, get their product out to as many people as possible. You know, a BT or a History Network or History Channel, excuse me, or a Discovery Channel might have 90 million homes available to them. And that's a huge audience for advertisers to want to tap into. If I'm a broadcast network like ABC or NBC or what have you, that's, you know, 110, 115 million. So, you know, there's a lot of talk about streaming, and yes, streaming is good and it's buzzy, but, you know, broadcasting cable is still the best way to get as many eyeballs as possible. So the way we do that is putting together a schedule that, you know, not only flows seamlessly show into show, but, you know, creating content that, you know, our audiences love, and, you know, that is on brand and satisfies our advertisers, all with the goal of ensuring that we hit, you know, certain ratings goals or certain revenue goals or estimates that we set forth and put out to our advertisers. And if we don't hit those numbers, then that's something that I don't want to get too far off tangent, but that's something called the make good, where if you don't hit your targets, then, you know, the advertisers get extra units to make up the deficiencies.
Gotcha.
But it's a business, you know, it's a business. It's fun, but it's a business too.
Yes, that's what I guess I'll trying to convey. What's the separation between business and fun? Because you work in this industry that's, you know, seen. I'm not sure if, you know, because you work at an industry or connected to the industry, are people just like, oh my gosh, you know, famous people. Like, what's the separation between business and fun? I guess that is the way you said it is.
Got it. I mean, yeah, I mean, definitely working in the TV industry has its perks because you get invited to certain events, or you're going, like, when I was at BT, for example, you know, you go to BT Awards or Soul Train Awards, or back in the day we had Rip the Runway and Black Girls Rock. So yes, those things are fun. I think if you talk to the people who work in production, those things are fun, but they also know all the backstories of what happened and celebrities you might have to deal with who are pains in the ass or, working 12, 15, 18-hour days. So it's a mix of both, like any other job, I guess, right?
Yeah. Um, is that distracting, you feel, to the ascension of, to your ascension in your career? And I guess what type of focus, I'm trying to figure out how to communicate this the best way, but yeah, like, between those things, you still have to be a leader, you still have to do your job well. But like, it's all this fun happening around you. So did you put yourself on kind of a regimen for check-ins and making sure that you were reaching out to tell people, raising your hand, hey, I want this responsibility, even though you enjoy what you're doing? Like, how are you still making time to manage your work?
Got it. I think it's I mean, for me specifically, we have a lot of targets that we have to hit. We get our, working in this job, you get your report card every day at 4 o'clock to see how you did the prior night. And, if the ratings are great, everyone's happy. If the ratings are not great, it's what happened, why did it happen? Was it the show? Was it something competitive? Did we air against another show that's too similar to our show? Should we have put it on another night? Should we have put it at a different time? So there are a lot of different variables that we think about. So I would say you don't really have time to focus on all the other stuff. Fun will happen when it happens, but we're here to do a job and focus on that. If that makes sense.
Gotcha. So you transitioned from ad sales to scheduling and programming, and that was your first role, specifically in that. But it had, like you said, the research component when you first interviewed me. So how did you know what to do? And did anyone help you or show you, like, oh, this is what you do now that you're in scheduling programming? Or did you just like fake it till you made it? Or
Uh, no, it's a great question. So I knew a little bit about what to do because I've worked in television and I know television. It was more about like contractual things that you had to worry about, like play dates. And a play date is basically if you hear a movie, twice in 24 hours, that's a play date, right? It's just thinking about those sort of things that people who worked in scheduling obviously knew because they were dealing with it. But I think that the thing I impress is that if you don't know something, ask questions. So I would ask my colleagues, most of whom were based in DC, tell me about this. They tell me about what they were working on or stuff that they can impart on me, and I, impart stuff on them from my perspective. So I think it's always important to, if you don't know something, ask questions, especially when you're new to a company, because no one really expects you to know everything when you first start. And I think if you're at a company for a while and you pretend you know something that you're expected to know and you don't, then I think that's when it becomes a problem. Because why didn't you ask the question a while ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So please ask questions.
Yeah.
Never assume.
Yeah, that's a great point to hit. And as you're moving up, and getting more specific now with what you're working on, and now your title is getting more detailed and you have more responsibilities, are you thinking, oh, I need to go get my MBA? And how are you thinking of your career? Because a lot of us, around that time, and just thinking, it feels like, oh, we need to get more education. But of course, you're in this position now, and you hadn't gone to get an MBA. So how did you get there? And were you ever conflicted with going, okay, now my career is really moving, let me go get an MBA so that I can like lock in an executive role?
I always, throughout my career, I've always thought about getting an MBA. Mm-hmm. And it never happened because I didn't want to do it. That's the really easy answer. And that's not to say that you shouldn't get an MBA, because I would never say don't get an MBA. It can only help you.
Mhm.
Um, but you should always, I would say, continue to keep learning. So whether that's taking a leadership class, or you still take business classes. What I ended up doing for myself was just taking some classes through Harvard Business School online, about 2 or 3 years ago, just to keep my brain moving and keep thinking critically. And um, I have two little ones. I have a 6 and a 4-year-old. So when they're that young, you can't really, your life is not your own anymore. But once they started, getting to sleep through the night, and you get your nights back, then that's when you can kind of start to focus on stuff, a little bit easier. So yeah, so that kind of answers your MBA question. I would never say don't get an MBA, because it can only help you. But I think at a point, I got to a point in my career where when I was at BET, did a lot of great things, and but we worked a lot of hours, and we got to a point where my oldest son was about to be born, and work-life balance was kind of all over the place. You were working till sometimes 8, 9 o'clock at night, a couple of times a week, just because that's the nature of who our boss was. It wasn't necessarily the company; it was just our department. And I didn't want to, kind of burn myself out. So I actually ended up, my friend and former coworker who I worked with at BET had transitioned to Discovery like 2 years prior, and she, kind of helped me transition over to that company, to Discovery Channel.
Yeah. And before you get into that transition, I do want you to touch on the work that you did at BET,
Sure.
in championing some of their big shows, the Being Mary Jane, Real Husbands of Hollywood,
Yeah.
and kind of what was the thought process behind that, and how did you?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And even before you get to that, I can say, one of the great things about BET during the time that I worked there was that, you know, not only the shows you mentioned, but being there when, Barack Obama was, you know, elected president of the United States, the first black president of the United States. And what a great moment that was, not only for the country, but, for BT viewers. So being a part of that, being a part of, all the inauguration coverage, um, being there during these momentous occasions when, some of these black icons died tragically, like Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston and Nelson Mandela, and all the stuff we had to do in terms of ripping up programming and working in coordination with our news department to get appropriate programming on and pay proper respect to these titans of their respective industries. So um, those are not moments that you want to happen, but it was really interesting to be there during that time. But in terms of being Mary Jane, the Akils, obviously, who Barbara Akil, who created the game, created Being Mary Jane. The game was our first real foray into scripted programming. So we used that to, kind of continue the legacy of scripted programming with Being Mary Jane. And then, Real Husbands of Hollywood was a skit that started in the BET Awards, if everybody remembers. And, we saw how popular that was, and we kind of used that to spin off a full length series with Kevin Hart, which was great because, Kevin Hart was a movie star when this series started. So be able to get him for, I can't remember how many years that show ran, but 4, 5, 6 seasons when he was a full-fledged movie star, it was pretty incredible and amazing.
Yeah. And at this point in time, you've had experience at multiple companies. So did you feel that it was easier being in or occupying space in the corporate workplace at BET, Black entertainment television versus, in NBC or Cats? And did you feel the difference and kind of speak to, I guess, company culture a bit?
Yeah, I definitely think you first off, I don't want to say you feel uncomfortable in other companies, but it's definitely feels like, you feel like you're at home. And particularly at BT, you have a family-like atmosphere with the people that you work with. Um, but like many other companies, BT sometimes is not always the most organized company in the world. They have changed since I've left. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn saying that. Um, but yeah, it definitely feels good to put on programming that represents you and represents who you are as a person. Um, so I was proud to be a part of that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that that's something, at least in media and entertainment too. The roles are different at all companies. Like the structures are totally different. So, you could be, I guess, a coordinator on original scripts here, and like that doesn't transfer to another organization. So I always find that interesting, the two, and also like the culture difference as well with the role
Yeah,
difference.
I mean, a title at one company doesn't necessarily mean it's the same title or the same money or it could be totally different. So you can use that title as a benchmark or a measuring stick, but it always helps to, if you're looking for a new job or whatever, I would say always do your research and don't assume that you can only make this amount of money or that you're going to make that amount of money. It's everything is a negotiation, right? So I think your best time to negotiate is after you've been selected for the job, but you haven't signed on the dotted line yet. So I think that's the best time to negotiate and get what you want out of that. Because after you're hired, your salary is what it is. You may get a bonus. You may get your 2 or 3% increase, maybe, right? But when you're negotiating, you know what you're negotiating for, and I think that's when you have kind of like the power to set your salary as best as possible.
Hmm. Did you have people that were helping you in the negotiation phase, since you had, obtained leadership status in the company that you're transferring from? How did that happen? Because a lot of us, in corporate, black and corporate, we're kind of just out here as the first. So,
Yeah, so let me tell you, when I first started, when I was transferring from or changing jobs from Cats to NBC,
mhm.
I was probably making like 18 or $19,000 at Cats Media, which is kind of crazy, right? Um, and when I was interviewing for the NBC job, they're like, "How much do you want?" I'm like, 35,000, right? Just threw that number out because I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I'm really making it now, right?" And the guy who was asking me the question, who was my future boss, he looked at me like, "This guy's an idiot. He's gonna ask for more money." So I say that to say, do your research. I didn't really do my research. I was just happy to, be hired at NBC and be making more money, but I didn't really think about what I could have asked for, could have gotten, right? So do your research, do your research, do your research.
Yeah.
And the other thing you could say is if they ask you how much you're looking for, you can always say, it's commensurate with my experience, or, if they offer you a number, you don't necessarily always have to accept the first number, right? So negotiate is what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. And at this point in your professional career that you're making this transition, I guess kind of blurring the two roles between like the last role you were at BT to Discovery Communications. What was kind of your reputation, and how would you identify yourself as a professional? Like, what were some traits that they're like, oh yeah, Chris did that. Like, we know Chris's hand was in that because it was like this, or it was delivered this way. What were some things that kind of set you apart?
Yeah, I would say I am, or I was proactive. So, I think one of the good thing that people should try to do in their careers is kind of manage their boss. Everybody's boss is different, and I've had my share of bosses who can't always manage, but managing your boss and kind of knowing what their style is and knowing what they want, um, day in and day out. Certain bosses may want updates via email or long presentations or stuff through PowerPoint. Some people may just want you to give updates quick and, a couple of sentences. So knowing what your boss wants, and, it's kind of like knowing your boss wants, if you're an assistant, and knowing your boss wants coffee every morning, right? You're going to have it done and ready and made to their specifications, right? And it's kind of similar to, I think, in the workplace. So I would say, managing your boss, being proactive, um, asking good questions, being a relationship builder, working in scheduling and strategy. We're kind of like the nerve center of the company because we set the schedule. Um, all the information kind of goes through us in terms of when a show is airing, working with ad sales, working with research, marketing, PR. So it's all about, relationship building and establishing relationships, I think is another thing people would say about me.
Okay. Good to know, because a lot of us, we see folks like you in these roles and they're just like, wow, how did you get there? Obviously, you have this amazing track record. What are some of the things that set you apart? And then, people, we seek to emulate those things, or at least to improve on ourselves.
No, it's nice of you to say. I would say, for me, it's been a long road, and I don't feel like people may think I've made it or I'm successful. I guess maybe, but I always feel like I'm maybe here and I could be here. So, because going from BT to Discovery was really a lateral move, and that was more about having a better work-life balance. I didn't change job titles. I made a little bit of extra money, but it wasn't an increase in job title. It was a lateral move, but more for my own sanity and work-life balance, and being able to work at a great brand like Discovery Channel too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, did you ever chart your path? Once you're getting new roles, bigger roles, did you ever say, "Hey, I think I want that role next," or I'm going to work towards getting in that seat? Or did it just kind of happen for you that you ended up getting further, doing more things?
That's a good question. I think for me, the industry is always changing so much because, a few years ago it was Netflix. Oh, everyone wants to work at Netflix and everyone wants to work at Amazon. And those are great companies. But, every network or every streaming service, they all have their challenges too, right? So I think it's a mix of figuring out what the next big thing is. Me personally, I just try to keep abreast of what's going on in the industry, and I read a lot, just to see what the next big trend is, because like I said, the industry is changing so much. So the next hot thing may not be so hot in a year or 6 months or what have you.
That's good perspective. Yeah. And through all of this, of course, you've remained Chris. So, what are some things that have kept you, yourself throughout these things? Are there any, I guess, peculiar hobbies that you've kept since you were like a child that now, you still nurture those things to remain grounded?
Hobbies. Wow. My hobbies are spending time with my kids. That's my hobby. Is that a hobby? Um, you know what? I just like a lover of pop culture and television and film, and big New York Undercover fan. That's my favorite show of all time. For anyone who knows me knows that. Um, yeah, I would say those are the things. Nothing peculiar, I think, but yeah, just a lover of the industry and how it's always changing, and loving all the push towards more diverse and inclusive content that we're seeing across not only broadcast and cable, but the streaming services. So still a lot of work to be done, but I think it's moving in the right direction.
Okay, yeah. And as far as your hope for the industry, I guess the way that, and of course, this is like a random question, so you don't have like a canned answer, I'm sure, but the impact that you're seeking to leave on the industry, um, how you see it, you know, and how you can affect it. What does that kind of look like?
What would be great for me is to see, everyone, when people think about television and media, they think about I think they tend to think about the front of the camera or the production side.
Hmm.
I think for me, it would be great to just see more executives of color, um, because you don't see that a lot. And you don't see it a lot at my company. You don't see it a lot at many other companies. Um, and the reason why that's important is because a lot of those executives are the ones who are making decisions about the content that you see on the networks, right? Or on the streaming services or what have you. So um, I think that needs improvement. I think there's a long way to go for that. So I would like to see that, and I, hope I can kind of help blaze a trail for people who are coming up behind me.
Yeah, I love that actually. That's certainly an area where, like you said, it's not really publicized or a lot of people speak about. Um, but that's really kind of the nuts and bolts when you get down to the yes.
Nuts and bolts. Yep, exactly.
So I do want to ask. I know we've mentioned legacy, we've mentioned well, motto, but onto that, in that same vein, I guess, what are trying to see how to say it the best to come across with the question the best way. But um when you think about your career, because it's not over, but you just have so much experience. That's what I say. What a word that's the right way, because you have so much experience. Um, I guess I can say, how has your mindset changed from in the beginning when you first read ad sales, cats, till now, at A&E? What's your mindset shifts that you've had on the workplace in general, like being in corporate, and on the ascension and climbing the ladder?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can point back to the diversity, inclusion, and equity part. I think when I first started, X number of years ago, um, there wasn't. I don't think it was on top of mind for many organizations, and I think only in the last, particularly the last year, for obvious reasons, it's something that's been at the forefront of many companies, or at least many companies say it's at the forefront, right? Because proof is in the pudding. But I think that, a lot of companies are recognizing that they can't get away with a lot of the stuff in terms of the attitudes or uh, the way that they look at their employees or their employees of color, and making sure that they're creating an environment that's inclusive to the employees' thoughts and their experiences, and um, making sure they're providing that space, and having the ability for their employees to express their opinions and of how they feel about things both within the company or the society at large. I think is something that we haven't seen ever, but more specific in the last year or so.
Yeah. Backing on that, what would you have told young Chris or younger Chris, as Chris with 20 years of experience?
Younger Chris, I would have told Chris, don't spend too many years working in ad sales research. Make the transition to programming sooner in your career, right? Because that points back to what I was saying. Like, I guess I made it unsuccessful, but did I spend too many years working in ad sales research? Could I have made that transition 2 years earlier? And would I, if I had, would I be at this level or at this position? But everything happens for a reason, and all the experience I gained helped shape me to who I am. But I would say don't wait to make a move. If you feel like you need to make a move and make a career change or uh, uh, change in your personal life or whatever, then don't be afraid.
Wow, that just spoke to me for sure. Just now on this call. So thank you for saying that. Because I'm definitely like I was just telling you at that point, a lot of my peers were pivoting and
Yeah.
figuring out what's really like our passion, our purpose, what we really want to do. So that definitely speaks to me. I do want to know, just as this is the Black and Corporate Executive Coffee Chats, how has being a Black man been influential in your career, and how have you felt it, if at all?
How have I felt it? Um, it's been interesting because I've had a lot of great coworkers and worked for a lot of companies, but I haven't been at many companies where I've seen many people who look like me, excluding BET, of course. Um, so yeah, I've been in meetings and at lunches and stuff where people say stuff that's you know for example, I was at a lunch where um, we were at a lunch with a client, and we were talking about a new mall that was opening in Jersey. It was the American Dream Mall, which I think just opened like a year and a half ago. And the client had mentioned that, oh yeah, you want to stay away from that mall because that's where the Bloods and Crips hang out. I'm like, huh? um, and he said this at two different lunches, by the way. It wasn't just one lunch. So it just goes to speak to the what's in people's minds and how their mentality is. And it's interesting that he said it in front of me, um, because he was comfortable saying it. So the fact that he was comfortable saying it is also interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
Like maybe in his mind, I'm just speculating. Maybe in his mind, he didn't see me as one of those people, right? So that's why he felt comfortable saying it. So, but yeah, you get those remarks or similar comments like that from time to time, and um, not to say that I get used to it because you should never get used to it, but it's kind of the reality of working in corporate America as a Black person and as a Black male.
yeah, which at your level, it's like, wow, still, um,
Totally.
so that's crazy to even consider to think about.
Yeah.
I do really quickly just want to go back to what you do about scheduling and programming and how there are different levels to it. What's the difference with how you're approaching scheduling and programming now at your executive role versus how you did it when you first got into scheduling and programming?
Well, I mean, obviously the content's different, network to network. So, for example, at BET, we had dozens and hundreds of movies to use to kind of shape the day, from an acquisition standpoint. At Discovery, it was all content that we owned. We did no acquisitions at all, so it was all content that we owned. And then at History, it's primarily owned content, but we have a little bit of acquisitions mixed in. So it really depends on the brand, what we're looking to do, which day parts are important. Obviously, Prime is the most important because that's the day part that advertisers, sell the best and we generate the most revenue from. But the other hat I wear, I should mention, is acquisitions. So acquisitions meaning that we acquire content that's on brand for the network, specifically theatrical content. So we meet and license content from all the big major distributors, whether it's a Disney or a Lionsgate or a Sony, um, formerly Fox, which is now kind of rolled up into Disney. So all the major distributors. Warner Brothers is the other one, and we acquire content that's on brand for the History audience. And I should note, I work on a History channel specifically. A&E is made up of History, Lifetime, A&E, Lifetime Movie Network, and FYI. But I work specifically for the History brand. So our audience is, 60 to 62% male. We have a median age of about 58 or 59, and it's predominantly white men that we who is our core audience. So we're acquiring content that kind of fits that profile. A lot of World War II military type content like a Hacksaw Ridge or American Sniper. We acquired Band of Brothers from Warner last fall, as well as the sequel, The Pacific. So that's the type of content we acquire. We also look at specials and anything that's in our brand wheelhouse. So it's the acquisition side and it's the scheduling and strategy side as well.
Okay. I guess also wanted to know kind of the modulation of responsibilities. So when you first start out, what could someone who's interested in scheduling and programming expect to do versus what you're doing now? How does that differ?
Yeah, so I think at my level, you're dealing with the day to day, but you're not necessarily touching the grids and making changes and doing any type of data entry. It's more high level, and delegating that to our director or our manager or our coordinator who's on our team. I interface a lot, obviously, with my boss, who's our EVP, excuse me, our SVP. I deal a lot more with finance and making sure that our budget is in good standing and balanced and budgeted the correct way. So it's more high level stuff, more meetings and conversations with, like I said, on the acquisition side with the distributors, versus someone who's starting out might be doing a lot more data entry and entering stuff into our scheduling software. But that's the most important stuff, because if that stuff's not right, then the network's not running correctly. So it's a really important job. And the coordinator is also dealing with our team in Stanford, because that's where our network ops team is. They're the ones who actually broadcast the signal that goes out to the country. So it's very important stuff that the entry level person does.
Mm-hmm. I love that you mentioned those things, because I know for me and a lot of people on the outside of this industry that a lot of people want to get into don't really know what's the best thing to expect. And there's not too much information on what these roles actually are.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know what scheduling strategy is. I don't know if people just think that we throw shows on the dartboard and say, hey, let's put that on, but it's really it's a couple of different things. It's working closely with our research team to see what's working, what's not working on our network. It's having a sense of the competitive landscape. So if there's a big award show, or there's a Super Bowl, or it's Game 7 of the NBA Finals, or if the number one show on cable is airing, which is actually one of our shows, Curse of Oak Island, but it used to be Yellowstone, right? Yellowstone is a show on Paramount that does extremely well, and it's kind of like appeals to our audience. So anytime we ever air anything against that show, our ratings suffer. So just being aware of the competitive landscape and kind of the pitfalls that we can go up against. So yeah, it's a lot of different things. It's working with sales and knowing that sales may need a big tentpole. A tentpole is could be like a big mini series, like last year we had a mini series about Ulysses S. Grant, or it could be a big mini series about Lincoln that we have coming in the next year. Sales has the ability to sell those to advertisers with premium dollars. So usually we try to space those out, maybe one per quarter or what have you. It might be something like what Discovery does with Shark Week, right? They have Shark Week every summer, and every summer, you're going to get 8 days of shark themed content that advertisers can go out, or the ad sales team can go out and sell to advertisers, right? It's those big premium events that, really help solidify the network.
Nice. Now, I do want to be respectful of time, and I know we're coming up on an hour, if not a little bit over. So I want to tie a bow on the conversation with this last question, if you could, or if you can answer this one last question. But it is. How would you, or what advice would you give to others, folks in media and entertainment, or just in general, to use their Blackness as a superpower in the workplace,
Yeah,
especially
I would.
in the
Yeah,
environment?
yeah, I would say, I think now is a time, and I've never seen a time before, and since I've been working, where being vocal and sharing your opinion is actually a good thing and wanted. In most companies, some companies still are like, but in most companies, I think they want you to show your opinion and be your true self. And you could do that through a number of ways, whether it's creating an affinity group. Some companies have affinity groups. Having the ability to, you know, share and providing a safe space with like-minded employees where you can kind of be open and honest and not feel like you have to hold back. But I think this is a good time if you're a young person coming up in the industry, because when I was starting out, um, didn't feel comfortable being able to say those things, but now I feel like it's kind of expected.
Mm.
You know?
Mhm. Mhm. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you definitely coming on here and speaking, giving us over an hour of great content. um, yeah, and I really hope that listeners were able to get a lot out of this as I was. I definitely learned a ton and just got career advice in general from you and the wealth of experiences that you've had. I think it's pretty cool just hearing about all the different times in the world that you've lived through in the industry and how that. Oh yeah, sorry, I'm just like all the many years, not to exaggerate the age. But no, for me, I'm 26, 95. So I was a child during some of these moments. So how I experienced it was different than, what you experienced, especially being in New York City for a lot of these pivotal moments. So that was pretty cool. I definitely feel that this episode is a treat. And the listeners who are still here in the audience, I hope that you have gotten some goodies from this time. So
Thank you so much, Taylor. I really appreciate it. This was great.
thank you.